Welcome back, everybody. This is Mr. Bradley, and this is part 2 of my using Logger Pro to analyze video screencast. In part 1, I basically showed you how to get to this point. I showed you how to insert a movie. I showed you how to click on the moving object, and I showed you how to basically scale the movie so that the moving object, or so that the video analysis is actually thinking in real-world dimensions. In this part of the in this video, I want to show you really now what you can do with this now that you've marked the moving object. So, you know, when you're done marking it, you probably have something like this. You may notice that behind the video screen, there's a data table and there's maybe what appears to be a graph. Really, the simplest thing to do is to sort of resize all of the windows so that you can look at everything on one screen. So, you know, you can resize the windows by dragging the corners of each window, and in this case I might just want to drag it over to the side a little bit. And now let's just kind of take a look at what we have. Over here on the far left we have a window that's labeled video analysis, and it's basically the data table of all of the clicking that I did. If you go back to the very beginning of this, you can see at time 0 there's got nothing there, and then all the way up at 1.047 seconds I start to have some points marked. Well, if you remember, the car wasn't moving at the beginning of the video, so I actually skipped forward some frames until the motion began, and then I started clicking from there. So this actually shows like a negative position, but it's almost 0. That really has to do with where I located the XY axis when I put that XY axis on the video. You'll also notice that there's Y positions, which pretty much don't change because the car was moving horizontally, and then there's 2 columns of velocity. Now, these columns are actually calculated numbers. Logger Pro takes the values of position and time in these columns, and it does, you know, it does a calculus calculation using derivatives to figure out what these velocities are. We don't really need to get into the details of that too much, but just understand that this velocity, you know, each one of these velocities is really a pretty good approximation of how fast the car was going in that particular frame of the video. All right, well, when I go over here and look at the window on the bottom right, you can see my graphs of position versus time, both X and Y position. This is kind of the default graph that gets displayed. The positions are in feet because that was the scale I used. If I had put in some scale in meters, then I would see positions in meters and I would see velocities in meters per second. I'm going to look at each one of these positions individually. If I look at just the X position, that's the horizontal position of the car. You can see that, you know, at about 1.047 seconds, it was just sitting at rest, and then it stayed at rest for a little while until it started to move away from the origin. This curving indicates that the car was accelerating, which is what I would expect. If I look at the Y position, you can see that it doesn't really move up and down, and that is what I expect because it was just moving horizontally. I can also look at the X velocity. By the way I'm doing this is I'm just clicking on the Y-axis with the mouse, and this menu comes up. So if I look at the velocity of the car in the X direction, I see this, which is pretty useful to me because it shows me that the car was not moving at first, and then it accelerated and gained speed until it ended up going about 7.86 feet per second. I know that because I'm just looking at the values in the window at the bottom left hand of the window. At 2.438 seconds, it was going 7.86 feet per second. Well, this is probably the most useful thing for me because it allows me to see, was there constant acceleration, was there something else going on? In reality, it looks like there was probably constant acceleration going on from this data point all the way up to this data point. Now, I know there was some jumping up and down, but I would really attribute that to the clicking, especially because there's not a general trend that emerges. You know, as soon as it goes down, it goes back up again, and vice versa. And in reality, there was a pretty, you know, constant acceleration from, you know, this point to this point. Now, at the beginning, there was not constant acceleration, which is really what I would expect. I mean, it's going to probably accelerate a lot at first, and then not so much after that. And that's really how things accelerate in nature. Especially cars. Cars have the most acceleration at the beginning, and then that acceleration tapers off, you know, as they get moving. We'll talk more about that in class. Well, you know, I can find out what those rates of acceleration are 2 ways. I can look at this data set right here. I notice as I highlight it, it's also highlighted in the data table to the left. And I could use kinematics equations to calculate the acceleration. I could call this the initial velocity and this the initial time. And I could go down to the bottom of that and I could call that the final velocity and this is the final time. And I could calculate the acceleration by doing change in velocity over change in time. I don't really need to do that because there's a simpler way to do it. Really, by calculating that acceleration, I'm really just finding the slope of that line, and Logger Pro will do that for me. If I go up here to the Analyze options and do a linear fit that fits that data with a straight line, and the slope of that straight line is the acceleration of the car on average from this point to this point. So it says the acceleration was 5.196 feet per second. That number's got 4 sig figs. Because of the roughness and you know the error involved in me clicking the video, there's no way I would give it 4 sig figs. At best, I would say the acceleration is 5.2 feet per second. And that's over just that interval that I collected. This is something that's really nice to know, and in labs in this class, and maybe for some of the outside things that you're going to do for this class, you might need to be able to do this. So, you know, at the bare minimum, you have to be able to look at a velocity time graph in Logger Pro and find the rate of acceleration. Now, one other thing I want to show you here that I think is kind of nice is I can also look at the different accelerations in this beginning interval. And the way I would do that is by using a different tool in Logger Pro. If you go up here to the menu toolbar up above, you know, as you hold your mouse across these different things, when I hold it over the M equals button, the word tangent pops up. Well, what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to see the velocity at, or I'm sorry, the slope of the line at that point. And that means it's called like an instantaneous slope. And that instantaneous slope really represents the acceleration at that time. So, you know, I could go to the beginning here and say, well, you know, the rate of acceleration at first was 3.574, and then it was 7.420, and then it was 10.626, and then it was 10.707, and then it tapered off to 8.731, and you could see that those instantaneous slopes might be a useful thing to know as well. What I would truly say is I would just put the mouse down like right there and say, you know, really the average slope at the beginning was about 10.707 feet per second, because that slope kind of represents that first little interval before the constant acceleration began. You know, the other thing I really like about this, by the way, is you notice when you put the tangent line in different places, the video kind of advances forward to that frame. So it's kind of cool because you can see like when it's at a certain place what its acceleration was. And that might be something that you use too in video analysis for different reasons over the course of the year. So anyway, this hopefully gave you a nice introduction to the kinds of things you can get with Logger Pro. There's certainly more advanced things to do. You can actually even write your own equations and make your own data columns over here. If you wanted to calculate something from this data, you could do that. Logger Pro is a pretty powerful tool. So I don't know, good luck using Logger Pro. If you have any other questions, of course, you can ask me. Or I'm sure you could look around on the internet and find some other people that are showing how to use this as well. Have a great day. And actually, I did forget to talk to you about this. Once you're done collecting the data and marking the video and getting the graphs that you want to look at, if you're going to use this as part of a lab report or something else, you really need to provide proof of your data collection. So the simplest way to do that is to just copy and paste this stuff into Microsoft Word. Trying to print out of Logger Pro doesn't work very good. Plus you can do some neat formatting with these things. So there's lots of ways to copy and paste out of here. You can select the window and you can just do a simple copy and paste. That'd be fine. But I think the easiest way is to group it the way you want it to look. So I'm going to resize these windows so that it'll look the way that I want it to look in just a moment. And I'm going to kind of move them together. And then I'm going to use a tool that exists in Microsoft Windows. Pretty much it's been there for a long time. You just never knew it was there. There's a little program called Snipping Tool. And you know, when you open up Snipping Tool, you get this window, you hit the new button, and now you're just, you know, kind of directed to drag over what you want to copy. So you know, as I drag over this particular part of Microsoft Word, it just copies that, it puts it into the clipboard, and then, you know, I can save that, or I could just paste it. I can copy it into the clipboard, and then I can paste it into any program I want to use. So, you know, this is kind of cool. We actually use this quite a bit when we're making up documents and trying to include graphics. It's really just the simplest way to do that. All right, well, I hope this video serves the purpose that I intended, which is just to give you some background on some of the things you can do, and, you know, familiarize you with some of the basic tools. There's a lot of other advanced options up here that I didn't go over. I figure that you'll explore those yourself, and you'll come up with some other great things you can use Logger Pro for. Have a great day, and that's it.